Richard Morrison had built his fortune through careful planning and precise execution. Every decision calculated, every risk measured. But standing in the doorway of his own kitchen on a Tuesday afternoon, watching a scene he'd never anticipated, he realized that the most important things in life couldn't be predicted or controlled. His 4 sons sat in a perfect row on the window bench, all wearing matching red shirts and jeans, their blonde hair catching the afternoon light. They were 4 years old, quadruplets, and they were laughing, actually laughing, with their heads thrown back and their small bodies shaking with joy. In the center of the kitchen stood Helen Crawford, the woman he'd hired 3 months ago. She was in her mid-50s, with kind eyes and a gentle manner. She wore a navy blue dress with a white collar and a striped apron that somehow made her look both professional and approachable. On her shoulders sat his youngest son, Timothy, his yellow bow tie slightly askew, gripping her head for balance as she pretended to stumble around like a dizzy elephant. Richard's briefcase slipped from his hand, hitting the floor with a soft thud. Helen turned, startled, carefully lifting Timothy down. "Mr. Morrison, I didn't expect you home so early." Richard couldn't find words. He just stood there, staring at his sons, at their smiles, at the light in their eyes that had been missing for so long. It had been 14 months since his wife, Jennifer, died suddenly from an aneurysm. One moment she'd been laughing at breakfast, the next she was gone. The boys had been barely 3 years old, too young to understand death but old enough to feel the enormous absence it left behind. In the months that followed, Richard had thrown himself into work, not because he didn't love his sons, but because he didn't know how to help them. How do you explain the unexplainable to children who still believed in magic? How do you comfort grief you can barely comprehend yourself? He'd hired nanny after nanny, women with impressive resumes and stern approaches to child rearing. They'd lasted days, sometimes only hours. The boys had been difficult, withdrawn, prone to tantrums and tears. They wouldn't eat. They wouldn't sleep. They certainly wouldn't smile. Then Helen had arrived, answering an ad he'd placed almost in desperation. She was older than the others, a grandmother herself. Her husband had died 7 years earlier, she told him during the interview. She understood loss. She understood that sometimes children didn't need someone to fix them. They needed someone to simply be with them while they healed. Richard had been skeptical. His sons needed structure, discipline, routine. What could this soft-spoken woman with her gentle manner possibly accomplish? Now, watching his 4 boys grinning like they didn't have a care in the world, he had his answer. "I'm sorry," Helen said, smoothing her apron. "We were just having a bit of fun before snack time. I hope you don't mind." "Mind?" Richard finally managed. "They're smiling. I haven't seen them really smile in over a year." Helen's expression softened. "Oh, they smile quite often, Mr. Morrison. Children have remarkable resilience when given the space to use it." The 4 boys had climbed down from their perch and were now gathered around their father, talking over each other in their excitement. "Dad, Dad, Helen taught us to make pancakes shaped like animals. She knows all the words to the dinosaur song. We built a fort in the living room with all the cushions. Timothy got to ride on her shoulders because he was the bravest at the doctor's office yesterday." Richard looked at Helen, who simply shrugged. "They've been very good. We've had quite an adventure these past few months." Over the following weeks, Richard found himself coming home earlier, not because work demanded less of him, but because he wanted to witness more of these small miracles. He'd arrived to find Helen and the boys in the backyard, hunting for insects with magnifying glasses, or in the playroom, building elaborate block towers, or in the kitchen, measuring flour and sugar for cookies, the counters dusted white with their enthusiastic help. Helen never seemed rattled by the chaos of 4 energetic boys. She moved through their world with a calm assurance, redirecting fights with gentle words, soothing hurts with patient attention, celebrating victories with genuine enthusiasm. One evening, after the boys were in bed, Richard invited Helen to stay for tea. They sat at the kitchen table, the house finally quiet. "How do you do it?" Richard asked. The other nannies, they all said the boys were impossible. Too difficult. Too damaged by grief. Helen's eyes flashed with something almost like anger. Children aren't damaged, Mr. Morrison. They're hurting. There's a difference. Damaged suggests something broken beyond repair. But hurt can heal with time and care. I've tried, Richard said, and he was surprised by the crack in his voice. I've tried to be there for them, but every time I look at them, I see Jennifer. Her eyes, her smile, her gestures, and the pain is so overwhelming. I don't know how to breathe through it. Helen reached across the table and patted his hand, a simple gesture that somehow conveyed enormous comfort. Of course you see her. They're part of her. And that's beautiful, not painful. The pain comes from thinking you've lost her completely. But she's right there, in every laugh, every tantrum, every achievement. Your boys are her legacy. How did you get through it? Richard asked. When your husband died. Helen was quiet for a moment, her fingers wrapped around her teacup. One day at a time. One breath at a time. I let myself grieve, but I didn't let grief become my identity. I had grandchildren who needed me, children who needed to see that life continues even after loss. So I showed up. Every day, I just showed up. Some days, that was all I could manage. But it was enough. Is it enough? Richard asked. Just showing up. For children, yes, Helen said firmly. They don't need perfection. They need presence. They need to know that even though their mother is gone, they're still safe, still loved, still important. You've been giving them that, Mr. Morrison. You've been showing up for them, even when it hurt. Don't diminish that. Richard felt something loosen in his chest. A knot he hadn't even realized was there. As spring turned to summer, the Morrison household transformed. The boys, who had been withdrawn and silent, became boisterous and energetic. They ran through the house with abandon, their laughter echoing off the walls. They asked endless questions, told elaborate stories, invented complicated games that made sense only to them. And Helen was always there, a steady presence in their chaotic world. She taught them to tie their shoes and zip their jackets. She read them stories in her warm, measured voice, doing all the character voices with theatrical flair. She sat with them when nightmares came, rubbing backs and whispering reassurances until sleep returned. But she also did something else, something Richard hadn't expected. She kept Jennifer's memory alive in natural, comfortable ways. She found photographs and created a special album the boys could look through whenever they wanted. She encouraged them to talk about their mother, to share memories even if they were fragmented and confused. Your mama loved strawberries, she'd say while making smoothies. She'd be so proud of how brave you're all being. Your mama used to sing this song, she'd mention while tucking them in. Close your eyes and maybe you can hear her voice in your heart. She never tried to replace Jennifer. She simply made space for her memory to exist alongside their present life. One afternoon, Richard came home to find Helen teaching the boys to make Jennifer's favorite chocolate cake. The recipe card was propped against the counter, written in his wife's familiar handwriting. I found this in the kitchen drawer, Helen explained. I thought perhaps the boys might like to learn to make it. A way to feel close to their mother. Richard watched his 4 sons, perched on step stools around the counter, taking turns stirring the batter. Matthew, the most serious of the 4, was carefully reading the measurements. Lucas was licking the spoon. Benjamin was adding chocolate chips with concentrated precision. And Timothy, the youngest by 3 minutes, was simply covered head to toe in flour, grinning like it was the best day of his life. Careful with the eggs, Helen instructed gently. We want them in the bowl, not on the floor. Too late. Benjamin cracked his egg with too much enthusiasm, sending shell fragments into the batter. That's all right, Helen said calmly, fishing them out. Everyone makes mistakes while learning. That's how we get better. Richard found himself smiling. These were the moments Jennifer had always treasured. The messy, imperfect, beautiful chaos of raising children. He'd been so focused on keeping everything clean, controlled, organized. He'd thought that's what the boys needed. But Helen had shown him that what they really needed was permission to be children again. That evening, they all ate chocolate cake at the dinner table, even though it was slightly lopsided and a bit too sweet. This is the best cake ever, Matthew declared. Mom would have loved it, Lucas added quietly. Helen caught Richard's eye across the table and smiled. The months continued to pass. The boys started pre-kindergarten, nervous but excited. Helen was there every morning, helping them choose clothes and pack lunches, offering encouragement and reassurance. She was there every afternoon, ready with snacks and questions about their day. She taught them small kindnesses, how to share toys without fighting, how to apologize when they hurt someone's feelings, how to notice when others needed help. Richard watched his sons develop empathy and patience under her gentle guidance. One Saturday morning, Richard found all four boys sitting with Helen in the living room, sorting through a box of old clothes. "What's this?" he asked. "We're collecting things to donate," Timothy explained seriously. "Helen says there are kids who don't have warm clothes for winter." "We're helping," Benjamin added, "because Mom always helped people." Richard felt his throat tighten. Jennifer had been passionate about charity work, always organizing drives and volunteering. He'd been so consumed by grief, he'd let those activities fall away. "That's very kind of you all," he managed to say. "It feels good to help," Helen said simply. "And it's a lovely way to honor your mother's memory, by continuing the kindness she put into the world." That evening, after the boys were asleep, Richard found Helen in the kitchen, preparing the next day's lunches. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I pay you for the hours we agreed upon. You don't need to stay late." Helen shrugged. "I don't mind. Besides, I enjoy it. Your boys have given me a sense of purpose I've been missing. After my husband died, my children and grandchildren tried to help, but they had their own lives. I felt adrift for quite a while. This position, caring for your sons, it's given me something to wake up for each morning." "They love you," Richard said. "You know that, don't you? They talk about you constantly. Helen this, Helen that. You've become essential to their lives. And they've become essential to mine," Helen admitted. "When you called me after that first interview and offered me the position, I almost turned it down. 4 young boys seemed like more than I could handle at my age. But something told me to take the chance. I'm glad I listened." "So am I," Richard said sincerely. As autumn arrived, painting the trees in shades of gold and crimson, Richard realized something profound. His home felt like a home again. Not the same as before, perhaps. Jennifer's absence would always leave a space nothing could fill. But the house was no longer a hollow monument to loss. It was alive again with voices and laughter, with the beautiful mess of daily living. One evening, nearly a year after Helen had first arrived, Richard organized a small celebration. Nothing elaborate, just a family dinner with a special cake. "What are we celebrating?" Matthew asked. "We're celebrating family," Richard said. "And we're celebrating Helen, who has become part of ours." The 4 boys cheered, crowding around Helen for hugs. Helen's eyes glistened with tears. "Thank you, Mr. Morrison. That means more than you know." "Please," Richard said. "I think it's time you called me Richard." They gathered around the dinner table, the 6 of them, and for the first time since Jennifer's death, Richard felt something close to peace. His sons were healthy, happy, thriving. They still had moments of sadness, still asked questions about their mother that broke his heart. But they were learning to carry their grief alongside their joy, not letting it consume them entirely. And that was because of Helen. This patient, kind woman who had walked into their lives and quietly, steadily, helped them all learn to live again. After the boys were in bed that night, Richard found Helen gathering her things to leave. "Helen," he said, "I need you to know something. You didn't just help my sons. You helped me too. You showed me that it's possible to honor the past while still embracing the present. You taught me that grief and joy aren't opposites. They can coexist. They must coexist." Helen smiled, her weathered face radiating warmth. "You've done the hardest work yourself, Richard. I just provided a little support along the way. Your boys are lucky to have a father who loves them so deeply." "And they're lucky to have you," Richard replied. As Helen drove away that night, Richard stood in the doorway of his home, listening to the quiet. But it was a different kind of quiet now. Not the hollow silence of grief, but the peaceful stillness of a home at rest. Upstairs, His 4 sons slept soundly, their dreams untroubled. Family photographs lined the walls, Jennifer's smile preserved in frames, her memory woven into the fabric of their daily lives. Tomorrow, Helen would return. She'd arrive with her calm presence and gentle wisdom, ready for whatever the day brought. She'd help the boys with breakfast, tie shoes, answer impossible questions, soothe fights, celebrate small victories. She'd continue doing what she'd been doing all along, showing up, being present, offering love without conditions or expectations. Richard closed the door and turned off the lights, heading upstairs to check on his sleeping sons. As he stood in their doorway, watching their small chests rise and fall with each breath, he felt profound gratitude. Not just for Helen, though she'd been a gift beyond measure, but for the resilience of children, for the healing power of time, for the possibility of finding joy even in the aftermath of devastating loss. His sons would grow up knowing their mother through stories and photographs, through the values she'd instilled and the love she'd given. But they'd also grow up knowing that after loss came healing, that kindness existed in unexpected places, that sometimes the people who help us most are the ones we least expect. And somewhere, Richard liked to think, Jennifer was watching. Grateful that her boys were learning to laugh again. Grateful that they'd found someone who could love them not in her place, but alongside her memory. The house settled into sleep, a home restored not to what it was, but to what it needed to be. And in the morning, when 4 blonde boys came thundering down the stairs and Helen arrived with her warm smile and gentle manner, life would continue its beautiful, imperfect, precious unfolding.